Remember this bad boy? This is the Asus server from one of my previous videos. The whole server is way too bulky for me. Let's upgrade this to the max and give it some GPU power. I will start by fully disassembling the server. Well, not fully. Basically, all I plan on keeping of this server is the motherboard and the memory. The motherboard is a standard ATX size, so I will easily be able to build this into a normal desktop case. This is one of those things I just love to do, disassemble and reassemble hardware. Especially when I have a goal or picture in mind of what I'm making and what I'm building, it is almost like meditation to me. Now that I got all the hardware out, you can see it even better. The motherboard is indeed an ATX size and even comes with a loose I/O bracket. I also took all the other hardware out of the server that I had put in there. This I will store neatly to ensure that I might be able to reuse it for another build or test rig. As I'm going to be running 2 processors, I also bought 2 processor coolers. When I looked at the specs and the socket of the motherboard, then these should be a great fit. However, as I'm planning on using them in a certain orientation, it seems that one of the clips of the bracket will be in the way for one of the memory banks. I will check it when I really place them, but during this test fit, it does seem to not fit. Now placing the motherboard into the new case, you can see this fits snugly in there. I made sure to buy the exact case size that would fit this motherboard. I went here for the Antec NX100 MIDI tower case with tempered acrylic side panel to really show off the goods inside. This case cost me only $50 new, something I wasn't expecting much from but really went beyond my expectations. Then for the PSU, I was able to score this industrial power supply which comes with enough connectors to basically connect anything I would like whilst having a wattage of 760. This should be plenty, as per a PSU calculator I used online. We should be able to run everything with only 500 watts power supply without an issue. This power supply I was able to pick up for only $25. As you can see, it isn't a fancy looking power supply or modular, but you can't really expect that much for this price, of course. The power supply will be hidden in this nice PSU shroud that the case has, and most cables we will be able to hide behind anyway. I do think that I might upgrade this for another PSU that I will buy new, but for the purpose of this build, I wanted to have a stable but cheap unit. There are 2 main reasons why I'm thinking of upgrading this. Number 1 being the ketchup and mustard kind of cables that are also a bit on the short side, as you can see here. Number 2 being the noise levels. But I didn't move the server into this case without thinking of doing an upgrade. I therefore have decided that I'm going with 2 RGB CPU coolers to cool down the 2x Intel Xeon X5670, which will give us a total of 24 cores. Then I had bought an additional 24 GB for a total of 48 GB memory. But this ended up not all fitting, meaning that I had to sacrifice on 16 GB memory. And then to really give it some good performance, I bought the cheapest GTX 1080 I could find. Smoker's dust included, which is very hard to get rid of, I realized. I actually ended up taking the cooler off and spraying this with brake cleaner before mounting it back on there to get rid of all the smoker's dust. Really not a pleasant smell, as when the card gets hot, the smell will fill the room within seconds while gaming. Now, as everything was already in the case, I will now take out the old hardware first. You might ask yourself, why did I put everything in the case before upgrading? Well, the answer is quite simple. I didn't want to buy all these upgrades before I knew for sure I could fit the motherboard correctly, and that it would also survive the move to the other case. One of the things that really had me worried was the fact that the motherboard doesn't come with any clear instructions on how to connect the power button cable, for example. I ended up actually finding the old connector, and then locating the correct cables that went to the button and connected the power button to the same pins. After I did this, I could quickly realize that this indeed works, and that the PC was still functioning well. And here's when the memory doesn't fit, exactly what I had noticed before also. So I decided to sacrifice on 16 GB of memory, making the total 32 GB, which is still plenty of memory for gaming. The only thing that I couldn't get working was the USB 3.0 port of the case, but that is because this motherboard doesn't have any USB 3.0. Now that we have completed the build, let's do a quick cost breakdown. The Asus server I bought for $53, then the Antec NX100 case I bought new for $50, a set of Xeon X5670 CPUs for only $26, 2 CPU coolers for $20, then 24 GB of ECC memory for $12, the Nvidia GTX 1080 Founders Edition for only $107, and last but not least, the 760 watts power supply for $25. This brings us to a grand total of just below $300, making this a very powerful budget build. But as for any budget build, the most interesting is to come. What about the benchmarks? Can it game? And what can we play on it with high or even epic settings? Let's find out. For our benchmarks, I plan to run the benchmark for CSGO, which is an all-time favorite, then Splitgate, Fortnite, GTA 5, Valorant, and Cyberpunk. Unfortunately, GTA 5, Valorant, and Cyberpunk just didn't want to download correctly, as I kept getting corrupt installations, which means I had to skip these games. However, let's start with CSGO, or spelled out Counter-Strike Global Offensive. The monitor I'm playing on has a resolution of 1920 x 1200, which was the resolution I tested on. Then I put every setting as high as I could. When playing, I noticed an average frames per second of 132, with a maximum of 301, and the lowest that I was able to see was 103 frames per second. This is amazing performance compared to other budget builds, but then again, this build is quite a bit more expensive than the other ones. Then moving on to our next game, Splitgate, a personal favorite of mine. I keep having it that anytime I play this game, I end up playing again for hours. I'm still using the same resolution of 1920 x 1200, and again set everything to the highest. With this setup, I was able to get an average frames per second of 263. Some peaks towards 311, and sometimes the lowest that came forward was 187. This is amazingly playable performance. This game Splitgate just keeps giving me flashbacks to how I used to play with my friends back in the day on Call of Duty. Now let's move on to the game called Fortnite. This I again play on the resolution 1920 x 1200, with everything on the highest or epic if possible. Playing this, we saw an average frame rate of 130 frames per second, some high peaks of 189, and sometimes as low as 86 frames per second. I have noticed over my multiple tests of different systems that Fortnite always fluctuates a lot in frames, but this was very, very playable, and looked amazing. Playing games on this machine has been absolutely amazing. The only thing that kept giving issue was my own internet connection, meaning some games I couldn't play for my benchmarks here, which is an absolute shame. But as we bought the case new, we of course have to peel off the plastic. Oh, how satisfying! I hope you all liked this video and would like to leave a like and subscribe, and then I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.